May the Lord bless the reading of His Word. Shabbat Shalom. If you see me, I'm just running back here, grab my water real quick. Real quick. It just occurred to me. I said that, I didn't realize what I was saying. Real quick. All right. It is wonderful to be here in the house of the Lord on His Shabbat, His Sabbath day. Today, we're going to talk about one of the feasts and festivals, actually, that are mentioned in Leviticus. Come on. There you go. It's the feast of, anyone know? What's tomorrow? Shavuot, the Feast of Weeks. That's right. I'm so glad you guys knew that. Give me 1 second while I pull this up here. The feast, let's talk about this morning's Torah portion. The portion this morning is Parshat Beha'alotcha. Beha'alotcha comes from Numbers chapter 8 in verse 2, which is the very beginning of this portion. Actually starts in verse 1. But it says, when you mount the lamps, is what the word means. Beha'alotcha et hanerot. This is a continuation of last week's portion. Remember, the whole scripture is one continuous story, one continuous revelation of who God is. So last week, at the very end of the portion, they had dedicated the temple. It was all set and ready to go. Now they have to put it all together and get everything ready so that they can do what they need to do. And now that the temple is dedicated, the Levites need to be prepared and trained and ready to go. Okay? So what happens next is really interesting. I never really saw this before, but the people present the Levites to the Lord as an offering. That's kind of interesting. It's as if the people were saying, okay, these guys are special, we're giving them to you. Now, they didn't have to do that. God already said to them, He took them. Okay? Instead of taking the firstborn of every house in Israel, He said, all right, I'm just going to take this one family for history. And that was okay with everybody. And the whole purpose of the Levites was to serve in the tabernacle. Now that the tabernacle was created, they had purpose, they had function, they had stuff to do. You know, so that's what happens. They're offered to the Lord as an offering. And then just to make sure that everyone is straight, God says, okay, look, these guys are not going to serve their entire lives. They do get to retire. Okay? And He gives them the ages and what happens and what they're allowed to do once they retire and all that kind of stuff. Then it talks about the Passover. And second Passover. Did you know there was a second Passover? Kim and I experienced that this year. Actually, it's the first time that we had to do it. We were traveling during Passover itself. We were far away, and there was no way we could actually celebrate it and honor it the way that we wanted to. So we had to do it the following month. The scripture says that if you can't observe it on the 14th day of the month of Nisan, the 14th of the next month, you can go ahead and you can celebrate it, and it would be just like if you had done it when you were supposed to. Then it talks about the cloud over the tabernacle. Now, this was sort of where I had initially thought I was going to start off with this sermon. But you remember this what happened with the cloud over the tabernacle? Well, it was a cloud during the day. What happened at night? There's a pillar of fire. Nobody did a thing while the cloud or the pillar was there. They didn't move. They stayed right where they were. When that cloud got up, or the pillar of fire got up, that's when they moved. That's when they packed up the whole camp, they packed up the tabernacle, they left wherever they followed the cloud or the pillar wherever it was going. That's when they moved. And the scripture says, as if they wanted to make sure that we understood that no matter what, how long it was, if the pillar didn't move or the cloud didn't move, they didn't move. It says it could have been one night, could have been a whole day, could have been a month, could have been a year. It made no difference. They didn't move if the cloud didn't move or the pillar didn't move. That's how dedicated they were, and that's from this portion. Right after we talk about that, he talks about the building of some silver trumpets. The silver trumpets were created to mimic the shofar that we heard this morning. And the reason for that is because that's how they called everybody to move. When the cloud got up, the shofar directed people so that they knew where to go and what to do and when everyone was leaving. So the trumpets were created, and then once the trumpets were created, we have the first movement recorded. Up until this time, remember, we're in Numbers. We are still in exactly the same location we were in way back in Exodus chapter 19. When after they had come through the Red Sea, they found the mountain, they camped at the mountain. That's where they've been ever since. Now the tabernacle has been created, everything's in order. The silver trumpets have been created. They start to sound the trumpets, and everybody packs up and they head on their way. Right after they move, along with this first movement, comes the very first, well, not really the very first, but the first complaint. Go figure. What do they say? Well, they complain about meat. They complain about meat. Look, we had it great back in Egypt. We had all the meat and onions and video. What are we doing here? We should just go back. Moses then intercedes on their behalf, and God says, don't worry. Oh, they'll have meat. And you can almost hear him sarcastically like that. Oh, don't worry. They'll have all the meat they can take. Trust me on this. And that's exactly what happened. But the assistance was given by the Spirit. By the Spirit. And then they get their quail. And then we read about Aaron and Miriam's sin. They were talking against Moses and Aaron. They were talking against Moses because Aaron was involved in that. And the way this portion ends is Miriam gets stricken with leprosy. Remember this? But Miriam was such a beloved figure in all of Israel that even though the cloud had gotten up and they were supposed to start moving, they said, look, we are not going anywhere without Miriam. God said, okay. So she was outside of the camp for 7 days. She got healed, and she came back to the camp, and then they moved. And that's where this particular portion ends. Now, this up until last night, the portion that I was going to jump off from was the cloud moving. And it's a great passage to talk about following the Spirit, being led by the Spirit, all that kind of stuff. The fact of the matter is, there's another passage that the Lord showed me this morning that he wanted me to jump from. And this is the passage where Moses, he shared some of the Spirit that was on him. You know what I'm talking about? Where God says, I'm going to take some of the Spirit that's on you, and I'm going to put it on these 70 other people, because it's not good for you to be doing what you're doing all by yourself. In fact, Moses said, it's funny, in traditional Jewish manner, he said, look, if you're going to saddle me with this lot, kill me now, just get it over with. I don't want to deal with this no more. God says, don't worry, what you need is help. So we'll get you some help. So Moses had the Spirit. When do we